The velvet of my mother's jewelry box felt cold under my fingertips, the first time I'd opened it since the funeral. Inside, nestled on the faded satin, lay the famous Vance sapphire. Except it wasn't. My loupe confirmed it instantly. Glass. A cheap, worthless imitation. The diamond earrings? Zirconia. The pearl necklace? Coated plastic. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. My brother's new wife, Amber, thought she'd pulled the heist of a lifetime, swapping my family's legacy for convincing fakes. She had no idea the real heirlooms were already safe in my company vault. What she'd stolen wasn't my mother's jewelry. It was my own carefully crafted trap, and she had just walked right into it. Amber, my brother Michael's whirlwind romance. She'd swept into our lives 6 months ago, a glittering vision of charm and ambition. Michael, bless his heart, was utterly besotted. He was blind to the way her eyes lingered a second too long on our mother's antiques, the way she'd casually ask about insurance valuations over dinner. He saw a soulmate. I saw a predator with a flawless manicure. My life's work at Vance and Sterling Appraisals is spotting the difference between the genuine article and a clever fake. Amber was the most convincing counterfeit I'd ever encountered. The tipping point was their engagement party. She'd admired the sapphire, her fingers tracing its facets. "It must be worth a fortune," she'd whispered to Michael, but her eyes were locked on the stone. It wasn't admiration, it was calculation. That was the night I went to my company vault. That was the night I set the bait. She thought she was stealing a treasure. In reality, she was just taking the first step into a meticulously crafted cage, and I was holding the key. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to try and sell my fakes. My mother, Eleanor Vance, wasn't just the woman who owned the jewelry. She was the woman who taught me its language. Our family didn't just accumulate wealth. We curated history, and she was its chief custodian. Long before I founded Vance and Sterling, I was her apprentice. She'd sit me at her mahogany desk, a 10-year-old boy with a jeweler's loupe, and show me the microscopic star inside the Vance sapphire, the tiny natural flaw that proved its authenticity. "Look, Elliot," she'd say, her voice a soft hum, "perfection is easy to fake. It's the beautiful flaws that tell the truth." That's what Michael never understood. To him, the collection was just a set of expensive objects, a burden from the past. He loved our mother, but he didn't share her passion. He saw a price tag. I saw a story. This fundamental difference between us was the gap Amber slipped through, a crack in our family's foundation. My suspicion of her wasn't a single event, but a slow, creeping dread, built from 100 tiny observations. The first time she came to the family home for dinner, she didn't just admire our mother's portrait, she critiqued its frame. 18th century giltwood. She'd mused aloud, her eyes scanning it. "The carving is exquisite. Have you had it appraised recently?" Michael beamed, proud of her discerning eye. I felt a chill. Her questions were never about beauty, always about value. A few weeks later, she asked about the security system. "With all these irreplaceable things," she'd said, gesturing vaguely around the room, "you must have top-of-the-line protection. Michael says you handle all that, Elliot." She smiled at me, a dazzling, empty smile. It wasn't a question, it was reconnaissance. I tried to talk to Michael. I cornered him in his study one night, the words feeling heavy and disloyal. "Michael, don't you think Amber is a little too interested in the estate's finances?" He looked up from his paperwork, his expression hardening. "What are you implying, Elliot, that she's a gold digger?" "I'm just saying be careful. She asks questions an auctioneer would ask, not a fiancé." He threw his pen down. "For God's sake, can't you just be happy for me? Not everything is an appraisal. She's my future wife, not one of your clients." The conversation was over before it began. He had chosen his reality, and in his version, I was the villain, the cynical older brother who couldn't stand to see him happy. He'd built a wall around her, and I knew then that a direct warning would only make him fortify it. If I accused her, he would defend her, and she would simply become more careful, more subtle in her theft. I couldn't stop her by talking. I had to let her expose herself. The engagement party, seeing her hand on that sapphire, wasn't a revelation. It was a confirmation. It was the moment I stopped being a brother and became a strategist. The plan I'd laid was simple, relying on one of Amber's most predictable traits, impatience. I arranged a weekend trip for Michael and me, a fabricated, rare book auction in Boston. I knew he couldn't resist. It was the first time since the engagement that the house would be empty for 48 hours. I left the security system armed, but with a deliberate, subtle flaw in the motion sensor covering the study where the jewelry box was kept, a blind spot I'd discovered years ago. It was a test. A professional thief would spot it. An amateur, driven by greed and arrogance, would simply get lucky and think they were brilliant. I didn't even have to check the security logs upon our return. The air in the house felt different. It was the cloying sweetness of Amber's perfume, a scent she never wore when we were home, lingering faintly in the upstairs hallway. She'd been there. I waited until that evening when Michael was relaxed, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Amber was with him, curled into his side on the sofa, the picture of domestic bliss. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke, my voice carefully pitched with dawning concern. "Michael," I began, "I was just in the study. The jewelry box, it feels lighter." He frowned. "What are you talking about, Elliot?" "Mother's jewelry box. I just picked it up. It doesn't feel right." Amber's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a performance of alarm so perfect it was almost admirable. Michael, however, just looked confused. He followed me to the study, Amber trailing behind, her hand already on his arm in a show of support. I placed the velvet box on the desk and opened it. The cheap glass and plastic fakes she'd left in their place winked under the lamplight. Michael's face fell. It wasn't slow. It was a complete collapse, the blood draining from his cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. "No," he whispered, his hand shaking as he reached for the fake sapphire. "No, it can't be." "They're all fakes, Michael," I said, my voice a hollow shell of the fury I actually felt. "Every single piece." "A robbery?" he stammered, looking around wildly. "But the alarm, nothing's broken." "I don't know," I lied, meeting his panicked gaze. And then Amber played her part. A sharp, theatrical gasp. "Oh, Michael!" she cried, clutching him. "Your mother's collection? Who could do such a thing?" Her eyes, glistening with manufactured tears, flickered towards me for a split second. In them, I didn't see sympathy. I saw triumph. She thought she'd won. She thought I was a fool, who hadn't even noticed the original swap, and that this discovery only solidified her position as the victim alongside my brother. The police were a formality I insisted upon. I filed the report myself, meticulously listing every piece that was stolen. I described the Vance sapphire in vivid detail, its carat weight, its flawless cornflower blue, its market value of $3 million. I described the diamond earrings, the pearl necklace, all with the full, staggering weight of their genuine insurance valuations. The officer taking my statement whistled. "This is a major heist, Mr. Vance. We'll need a list of anyone who had recent access to the house." Amber, standing by the door, went pale. Not because she feared being caught, she believed she was far too clever for that. She went pale because she was hearing, for the first time, the official, on-the-record value of the treasure she believed she now possessed. The fakes I had so carefully crafted were about to be treated as real, and the theft she committed was now a federal crime on paper. The cage was built. The door was shut. Now I just had to wait for her greed to make her rattle the bars. The week that followed was a masterclass in performative grief. I played the part of the stoic, heartbroken son, handling the endless calls from the insurance company and the police with grim efficiency. Michael, on the other hand, simply disintegrated. He drifted through the house like a ghost, his face a hollow mask of guilt. And clinging to him, her every gesture a carefully rehearsed display of loving support, was Amber. I watched them from the periphery, a silent observer in my own home. I saw the way her fingers would tighten on Michael's arm whenever the police were mentioned. I saw the flash of irritation in her eyes when he'd break down for the third time in an evening, her comforting facade momentarily cracking before being plastered back into place. She was an actress in a long-running play, and her audience was getting tiresome. The pressure was getting to her. She had a $3 million sapphire she couldn't wear, couldn't display, and was quickly learning she couldn't sell. The perfect moment came on a Thursday night. The three of us were sitting in the dining room, picking at a meal neither Michael nor I had the stomach for. The silence was thick, broken only by the clink of silverware. "I should have listened to you," Michael said suddenly, his voice raspy. He stared at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. "About security. About everything. I let Mom down." Amber immediately placed her hand on his. "Don't do this to yourself, darling. It's not your fault." Her gaze flickered to me, a warning. I ignored her, setting down my fork with deliberate calm. "The insurance company is escalating the claim," I said, my tone level, informative. "They're working with international art theft registries. They're circulating high-resolution photographs of every piece to all major auction houses and private dealers globally." I let that hang in the air for a second before adding the masterstroke. They were most interested in the sapphire's unique identifiers. I told them how Mom used to show me the tiny, star-shaped inclusion near the girdle, a microscopic flaw that makes it one of a kind. I looked directly at Amber. "They said it makes the real stone virtually impossible to sell. But it also makes a counterfeit, even a good one, laughably easy to spot." Her mask didn't just crack, it splintered. For a fraction of a second, I saw raw, cornered panic in her eyes before she smoothed it over with a concerned frown. "Well, that's good news, isn't it? It means the thief won't be able to profit." "Yes," I said, a slow smile touching my lips as I looked at my brother. "It means they're trapped." She thought she had stolen a fortune. I had just informed her she was holding a multi-million-dollar piece of evidence, laser-etched with her guilt. The only way out for her now was through the shadows, into the world of back-alley dealers and criminals who wouldn't care about a police report. And that was exactly where I wanted her to go. The knowledge of the sapphire's unique flaw worked on Amber like a slow-acting poison. The vibrant, confident woman my brother had married began to fray at the edges. She grew quiet at dinner, her eyes constantly darting towards me, searching for some hint that I knew. Her phone was never out of her sight. She'd jump whenever Michael entered a room unexpectedly, a flash of guilt on her face that he, in his grief-stricken fog, misinterpreted as shared anxiety over the robbery. She was holding a ticking time bomb, and my casual dinner table comment had set the timer. I needed to give her a way to defuse it, or rather a way she thought would defuse it, but would actually detonate it in her hands. My career hadn't just given me access to the glittering showrooms of Sotheby's and Christie's. It had also shown me the back doors, the shadowy corridors where provenance was a matter of convenience and cash was king. I knew people, and I had one particular person in mind. 2 days later, I staged my next move. I was on the phone in my study, the door deliberately left ajar, my voice pitched just loud enough to carry down the hall where Amber was pretending to read a magazine. The call was real, but the subject was a carefully chosen fiction. I was speaking to an old colleague from my early days, a man who, like me, knew the industry's underbelly. "No, David, nothing yet," I said into the receiver, my tone laced with weary frustration. "The police are useless. The insurance investigators are just ticking boxes. The pieces are gone." I paused, letting the silence hang. "Listen, a hypothetical. If someone wanted to move a high-profile, easily identifiable stone, a stone like the Vance sapphire, where would they go? Not the usual channels." I listened for a moment, nodding to no one. Amber had stopped turning the pages of her magazine. I could feel her attention like a physical weight. "Silas Black?" I said, making my voice drop. as if the name itself were dangerous. God, I haven't heard that name in years. Is he still active? Another pause. I see. No, of course not. I wouldn't go near him. The man's a ghost with a vicious reputation. The last person you'd want to be indebted to. Thanks, David. Just thinking out loud. I hung up the phone and walked out of the study, not even glancing in Amber's direction, as I went to the kitchen to pour a drink. I had planted the name. A name synonymous with untraceable transactions and high-risk solutions. A name that, to a desperate woman, would sound less like a threat and more like a lifeline. Silas Black was very real, but his loyalty, for a very steep price, belonged to me. He was the proprietor of a discreet, high-end pawn shop in the city's old quarter, a place that dealt in secrets as much as it did in jewels. He owed me a significant favor, one I was now ready to call in. The final piece of the trap was the delivery. The next morning, I made a show of sorting through some old files at the dining room table. I let a few old business cards spill from a folder onto the polished wood. Most were from legitimate auctioneers and dealers. Tucked among them, however, was one made of heavy black cardstock with a simple, silver-embossed name, Silas Black. Beneath it, just a phone number. No address, no title. Its starkness was its allure. I gathered the other cards, but accidentally left that one behind, partially obscured by a coaster. Then I turned to Michael. I'm heading into the office for a few hours. Need to get away from all this. I looked at Amber. Can I get you anything while I'm out? She shook her head, her eyes fixed on the newspaper in front of her, but I saw her gaze flicker for a nanosecond toward the card on the table. No, I'm fine, Elliot. Thank you. The drive to my office was the longest 10 miles of my life. I didn't go to my desk. I went straight to the security room and pulled up the live feed from the camera I'd hidden in the dining room, a tiny lens concealed in the spine of a leather-bound book on the mantelpiece. For 20 minutes, nothing. Amber sat perfectly still, a statue of false calm. Michael had gone upstairs. The house was quiet. Then she moved. It was a fluid, serpentine motion. She rose, walked to the bar to pour a glass of water, and on her way back to the table, her hand swept across its surface, palming the card. She didn't even break her stride. It was a professional, practiced gesture that chilled me to the bone. She sat back down, took a sip of water, and then, shielding her phone with the newspaper, she typed something in. A few seconds later, she slipped the phone back into her pocket and resumed her placid facade. I watched the screen, a cold, grim satisfaction settling over me. She'd taken the bait. The message had been sent. I leaned back in my chair and sent a single text to Silas Black's private number. Asterisk. She's on her way. The usual fee, plus 20%. Record everything. His reply came back instantly. Asterisk. A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Vance. The cage wasn't just locked anymore. Amber was now actively trying to saw through the bars with a tool I had handed her myself. And Silas Black, my ghost with a vicious reputation, was waiting on the other side to greet her. The file arrived in my inbox exactly 2 hours later. The subject line was a single word: playback. There was no message, only a secured video attachment. I dimmed the lights in my office, the city lights of Philadelphia, a distant silent audience beyond the window. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, isolating myself with what was to come. I pressed play. The camera angle was from high in a corner, looking down on a small, austere room. It wasn't a shop. It was a chamber, paneled in dark wood, containing only a heavy steel table and 2 chairs. Silas Black sat in one, his back to a solid, featureless wall. He was exactly as I remembered, unnervingly still, his gray hair neatly combed, his suit impeccable. He looked less like a criminal and more like a mortician about to discuss terms. Amber entered the frame. She looked smaller in that room, her fashionable coat and expensive handbag suddenly looking like a costume. She tried for an air of confidence, but her hands, clutching her purse, betrayed a tremor. She sat opposite him, placing a velvet roll on the table between them. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Black," she said, her voice attempting a casual tone that didn't land. Silas didn't smile. He simply nodded toward the velvet. "Show me." Her confidence grew as she unrolled the fabric. The fakes I'd commissioned glittered under the single, harsh light overhead. The glass sapphire, the zirconia diamonds, the plastic pearls. To an amateur, they were dazzling. She pushed the sapphire forward. The centerpiece, the Vance sapphire, 34 carats, unheated salon. She recited the details from the insurance report I'd filed, her voice filled with pride. Silas picked it up. He didn't use a loop, not at first. He just held it, turning it over in his fingers, his expression unreadable. He held it up to the light, his head tilted. Amber watched him, her posture rigid, a predator waiting for the kill. He set it down with a soft, final-sounding click. He then picked up one of the earrings, glanced at it for no more than a second, and put it back. He didn't even touch the pearls. He leaned back in his chair, his hands folding on the table. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the room's stillness like a razor. Amber blinked. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "The price is negotiable, of course, but—" "No," Silas repeated, his eyes locking onto hers. "I mean, I am not interested. I deal in jewels, Miss Hayes, not in glass." Her face froze. "What did you call me?" "Hayes. Your maiden name, before you married into the Vance family." He tapped the large blue stone with a fingernail. "This is a high-quality cubic zirconia, set in rhodium-plated silver. The diamonds are moissanite. The pearls are shell, well-coated, but plastic nonetheless. They are worth, perhaps, $5,000. As a collection of curiosities." The blood drained from Amber's face. "You're lying," she stammered, her voice a strangled gasp. "That's the Vance sapphire. It's worth millions." "The Vance sapphire," Silas said, his voice taking on the quality of a lecture, "has a unique asterism, a star-shaped flaw near the girdle, a flaw that proves its identity, a flaw that is absent from this bauble." He knew. Of course he knew. I had told him exactly what to look for, what to say. I watched Amber's face on the screen as the truth crashed down on her. The realization that she hadn't just failed, she had been played. Her heist, her masterpiece of deception, was built on a foundation of lies I had laid for her. Her eyes darted around the room, no longer a predator but a trapped animal searching for an escape that wasn't there. "Who are you?" she whispered, the fear raw and real. "I'm the man you came to for help," Silas said smoothly. He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "And here is the most interesting part. You see, stealing fakes isn't much of a crime. But you didn't report a theft of fakes, did you? Elliot Vance reported a theft of heirlooms worth over $5 million. He filed a police report. He filed an insurance claim. He created a very large, very public problem." Silas smiled for the first time. It was terrifying. "And now, you've brought his missing property to me, trying to sell it." He gestured vaguely toward the corner of the ceiling. "This entire conversation, Ms. Hayes, has been recorded, at the request of my client." Amber followed his gesture, her eyes landing on the camera lens. I could almost feel her heart stop from my office miles away. "Your client?" she breathed. "Mr. Elliot Vance." Silas confirmed, his voice laced with mock sympathy. He was so very concerned about where his mother's jewelry might end up. He paid me a generous fee to be his eyes. I clicked the video file closed. The silence in my office was absolute. There was no elation, no surge of triumph, just a quiet, hollow satisfaction, like the settling of a long overdue debt. The moral victory wasn't in her capture, it was in her complete and total self-immolation. She now understood she had built the cage herself, using my materials. When I arrived home, the air was thick with a new kind of tension. Michael was pacing the living room, a frantic energy radiating from him. Amber was sitting on the sofa, perfectly still, her skin the color of ash. She looked up as I entered, and her eyes held the unique terror of someone whose secrets have just been laid bare. "Amber had a busy afternoon," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I placed my phone on the coffee table between us. "She went to see a man named Silas Black, to sell some jewelry." Michael stopped pacing. "What are you talking about?" "Elliot, this isn't the time for—" She thought she was selling Mother's heirlooms. I interrupted, my gaze locked on her. Instead, she discovered they were fakes. Fake styes put in the box weeks ago. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. And she also discovered her entire attempt to sell them was being recorded. I finally looked at my brother, my voice softening. "For me." The realization washed over Michael's face not in a wave, but as a shattering impact. He turned slowly, looking at the woman he loved as if she were a stranger. "Amber?" he whispered, the name a question filled with a pain so deep it was almost silent. She flinched, a single pathetic sob escaping her lips. It was the only confession we would ever need. I picked up my phone. "The police would be very interested in this video," I said calmly. "So would the insurance investigators looking into the fraudulent $5 million claim. You committed a federal crime, Amber. I let the weight of her options press down on her. Or, you just leave. Pack a bag. Be gone in an hour. You never contact my brother again. You never use the Vance name. You just disappear. Consider it a gift. You don't go to prison, but you lose everything you schemed for. You simply cease to exist in our world." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked towards the front door, leaving the ruins of their life behind me. The cool night air felt clean. Justice wasn't always served in a courtroom. Sometimes it was simply the quiet final act of erasing. Now that the real heirlooms are safe, what would you do? Do I blow up my family by exposing her? Or do I keep my secret and let her think she got away with it?